Chapter: Opposition.
Many readers of the Ringing Cedars of Russia book series have been convinced that there is opposition to a harmonious and physically and spiritually healthy way of life. I have written several times about reports I've received alleging that the Russian Orthodox Church has come out against Anastasia and that clerics have helped spread rumors in administrative bodies that all readers of the Ringing Cedars of Russia series are sectarians. At first, I couldn't believe that these reports were serious. Soon after, however, members of the Novosibirsk Readers Club told me that church representatives had gone to the directors of the House of Culture and asked them to stop a readers' conference. Later, they showed me how, on one Orthodox website, a person calling himself a doctor of theology abused Anastasia in every possible way, using far from theological expressions. Readers entered into a polemic with him and tried to explain that Anastasia's ideas are positive. But the doctor of theology probably was incapable of discussing this topic. He was much more interested in a discussion of whether my name was real or a literary pseudonym. Later, people began sending in newspaper articles from the regions that seemed to have been written with carbon paper. From their manner of exposition, standard expressions, and malicious fabrications, it was easy to determine that the basic authorship stemmed from the same source. Finally, a completely extraordinary fact: Vystrecha, a St. Petersburg theater, put on a show called Anastasia, based on themes from the Ringing Cedars of Russia books. On July 23, 2002, the theater troupe arrived in Vladimir and performed the show in the Taneyev concert hall. On July 25th, they took the show to Tula. The previous date, the local paper ran as its lead article an appeal over the signature of the missionary office of Tula Diocese, calling on people not to attend the performance, and also talking about how the books and play advocate a return to paganism. In general, they were trying to frighten people. Nevertheless, the performance played before a full house. But when the Vystrecha theater director brought me this publication, I, as well as others who saw it immediately, had identical questions for the Tula Diocese Missionary Office. How could you criticize a show you hadn't seen? The only performance was in Vladimir just 2 days ago. Tula was basically the premiere. In St. Petersburg, clerics had come to the show and later thanked the actors for their highly spiritual performance. They said, "We wished there were more like this." This suggests that a certain force opposing Anastasia keeps close watch on spiritual phenomena like her. One can find this force both in Russia and beyond its borders, and it possesses a network capable of reacting to processes taking place among the human masses to develop or slow them at its discretion. The stories about priests from Anastasia, her grandfather, and her great-grandfather thus assume increasingly real and specific outlines, which have been expressed in specific actions of the present day. Her grandfather said that the high priest, who shapes the ideology of entire nations, refused to oppose Anastasia, but that the system the priest created would oppose it for centuries. This, too, found its confirmation. Locally, these zealous opponents proved incapable of penetrating the essence of what was going on. They acted as if according to a previously installed program, and unfairly accused Anastasia of actions completely uncharacteristic of her. For example, when asked, "Should everyone go to the forest?" Anastasia replies, "You shouldn't go to the forest. First clean up the place you have littered." However, parts of the press have alleged that Anastasia has called on people to abandon their urban housing and children and go to the forest. In this way, one can conclude that certain structures are actively attempting to prevent the advancement of Anastasia's ideas, specifically the allocation to each Russian family of a hectare of land for setting up their homestead. Of course, Anastasia's opponents try not to mention this basic idea and prefer to frighten people with their fabrications. Of course, I wanted to defend both the idea itself and the book's readers from slander and other obstacles to their goal, to defend them. But how and from whom specifically? After all, even slanderers have specific names, employers, and interest, of course. However, there is an analytical center of supporters of Anastasia's ideas. Far from all the people who belong to it are known to me personally, but their determinations and conclusions are quite interesting. For example, opposition is being rendered not directly at Anastasia, but at the national idea that has been born in Russia. The opposition is stemming from a single intermediate point. As if on signal, it is picked up locally by adepts not in contact with each other. These adepts are to be found in diverse social strata, including the church. The method is primitive, slander and the spread of obviously false rumors. If necessary, provocation by means of heading up the movement and discrediting it. The Analytical Center has identified by name and reported who specifically stole the computer with the manuscript and how they plan to hijack the website. Who attempted to replace Anastasia's books with frauds seemingly similar but in fact gradually leading away from her ideas, and how. I was also told the same forces had used the same means as they had against Anastasia to persecute the school of academician Shchetinin and the singer Baskov, a pleasant young man with a powerful and beautiful voice. But what does Baskov have to do with this, the reader wonders. This is exactly what drives them mad. Imagine this young Russian suddenly beginning to sing.
Dawn's shining on the ringing cedars branches, generations of the virtuous land cast their beam. Dawning heavens give the land a sigh of love, and interplanetary winds caress sleep with reeds in each grain is power conceived in each child a mission arises. In a white beam Russia is revived, Anastasia Russia, God have mercy.
The song was sung by children's chorus at the launch of the book Who Are We? At the Oktyabrski Concert Hall in St. Petersburg. You can hear the song sung by bards, and in the video, Bring Back Your Homeland, People, the letter written by a teacher from Belarus. It has apparently become a folk song. The singer Baskov may sing other patriotic songs about Russia too, and they will call out to Russians. These are the Russian initiatives someone finds so terrible. A Russian revival. They asked me not to worry, not to talk about what was going on, and assured me that for the first time the opportunity had arisen to study the mechanism and to name the specific people carrying out the ideological diversions against any positive trends in Russia. I wouldn't have said anything either, and would have let the appropriate agencies deal with this. Forgive me, though, I cannot be silent about one thing, despite my promise. If I were to be silent, I would lose my self-respect for good. It is impossible to remain silent any longer about the attacks on the school of academician Shchetinin and its teachers, and in general against innovative teachers, but above all, against the children. The pupils at Shchetinin's school, together with the teachers, decided to build one more school, in Belgorod province. They began equipping the building presented to them with the agreement of a local organization. Accustomed to hard work and design and construction, they quickly achieved their set goal. They wanted other children to be able to study in a good school, but they had to leave the refurbished building. Why? Because the provocateurs do not nap. The exact same accusations were spewed out from the exact same point that organized the spread of the rumors about all the readers of Anastasia's books. The Shchetinin school is a totalitarian sect. As in Anastasia's case, it was as if, after a secret signal, certain supposedly orthodox priests began to parrot what had been said, and once again using the same old phrases and groundless charges not confirmed by the facts. The pupils of Shchetinin school, a certain Father Alexei writes, allegedly have no experience whatsoever dealing with money. That's a lie, they do, but they're not obsessed with it the way you are. Shchetinin school uses the call to the circle method when the delinquent finds himself facing the entire group, which is negatively disposed toward him and expresses its censure. There's an accusation for you. Didn't the Cossacks call the delinquent to the circle? They did, not simply for censure, but for punishment with the lash. Don't our democratic and communist parties call their delinquents to their circle? Doesn't the church call its delinquents to the circle and strip them of their rank? The church has done even worse. It's burned its dissenters at the bonfire. And here we have this reproach. Might whoever wrote about this as a negative fact have meant that the circle can comprise just his own person? But then this would not be a circle. It would truly be totalitarianism. Different articles have also contended that Shchetinin's school is protected by Cossacks, and that one cannot always get onto the school grounds uninhibited. Gentlemen, Many schools are guarded nowadays, though, and not only in our country. Furthermore, what business do you have at Shchetinin's school? Have some fear of God. Guard your health. After all, you're horrified when you see that the children of the school don't drink or smoke, that they build their new buildings themselves and study hard. Apparently, grace descends upon you when you find drugs and obscenities in the schools. I'm not going to report all the nonsense written about this wonderful school. Even their colleagues have condemned these writers. Here is what Alexander Adamski wrote in his article.
On Saturday, the 1st of April, Author Television, ATV, broadcast a taped episode of Press Club devoted to what are now called diverse publications in the press about the school of Mikhail Petrovich Shchetinin in the village of Tekos in Krasnodar district. The producers of Press Club decided to gather teachers and journalists writing on schools in order to discuss everything. Professionally and philosophically, Shchetinin's system, a unique phenomenon of contemporary education, has of course given rise to debates. However, the arguments of pedagogical hitmen, Alexander Radov's expression, differ from the arguments of those debating Shchetinin over substance. Hitmen don't argue, they seek to destroy. As long as pedagogy has existed and thought about itself, since Socrates' day, the mob has beaten vivid teacher philosophers for stirring up youth and teaching unconventional ideas. So the latest attempt and a pogrom against Shchetinin is no accident. As Alexander Radov said at a press club session, if pogroms used to be organized by officials, these days this is done by perfectly nice journalists. Nice boys and girls, encountering something that does not fit their usual notions, something so unlike what, in their opinion, a school or a teacher should be, or how a system of education should be arranged, turn out to be incapable of coexisting with this incomprehensible idea that does not fit into their consciousness. What I don't understand has no right to exist. That is their simple and murderous logic. This is the old world stirring up what has left on the bottom. The last thing, the thick sediment of totalitarianism, aggressive and unshakable in its hatred for anything other or different or unlike itself. The old world, which has no place for tolerance, where children have to be identical and teachers have to teach the same thing. The beginning of the press club discussion was revealing. One of the publishers of attacks against Shchetinin contended that he had grounds for his accusations, but first wanted to hear the arguments in favor. It is striking how alive the Stalinist logic is, according to which any person first must be defended, so that afterward this accusers can decide the degree of guilt. No one doubts the defendant's guilt. The question is how guilty and what punishment to mete out. Arguing with the publishers is useless. Enabling them would only be publicizing them and flattering their vanity, which is what they're after, to be noticed. They have to be suffered, understanding that the old, outlived world speaks through their lips, that slumbering ignorance and malice guides their hand. They themselves are largely not to blame for anything, the way a child who plays with matches and burns down his house is not to blame. But what is going to happen to the school and the future of our education? From our standpoint, Shchetinin has made the greatest educational discovery, which of course has gone unnoticed by his attackers. He has discovered a new content for education. On his pedagogical island, he has arranged life in such a way that this way of life has become the content of the education. Of course, there are curricula and school subjects. The children, for example, study math and biology. But this is material, while the content has been the way of life of Tekos, constructing buildings, gathering food, protecting their residents, art, interacting with each other. Also, everyone talks about how the children are different and have not just a different study rhythm, but also different spheres for the fullest discovery of their abilities. For now, only Shchetinin has been able to make it so that different children move in their studies at an exclusively individual tempo, though. Therefore, a Shchetinin pupil may be studying 9th grade physics, but university-level architecture. This is what continuous education is. Who has been able to do such a thing? This is hard to imagine, let alone invent and implement. Of course, Shchetinin is a genius. Of course, Mikhail Petrovich is an artist, a thinker, and an outstanding figure in our culture. However, because of exactly this, you are not going to put either him or his work into a box or cliché, whether laudatory or condemnatory. One can and must argue with Shchetinin, One can learn from him, and he simply must be praised because an artist cannot live without praise and recognition. Shchetinin must not be insulted, however. No one should be insulted at all, and no one should be destroyed. Sooner or later, such efforts will prove embarrassing. It's only in a mob that people prove themselves by destroying someone else. In normal society, people prove themselves by demonstrating respect and love for others as well as themselves.
Yes, the ideological hitmen have been condemned, but what is condemnation to them? For them, this is a reward. Their bosses compensate them for everything. They're going to try even harder, always unpunished. How can they be punished? People have simply expressed their opinion or simply made a mistake. How can you punish someone for holding a mistaken opinion? But they didn't make a mistake. By calling the school a totalitarian sect, they were there by pursuing a precise goal: distancing administrative bodies from support of this beautiful new initiative in Russia. All officials are not going to go there to sort out the true state of affairs, but they will certainly try to distance themselves from any contacts. What if there really is something amiss at the school? In this way, the school is defenseless, liable to be torn to pieces, and here the hitmen will try their best to methodically aim their blows. What does this mean for us? After all, right before our eyes, more than 300 Russian children, as well as their teachers, have been smeared with mud, had their reputations blackened, and been insulted for 2 years. I don't believe that Russians are doing this. It's not in the Russian character. Yet this persecution is clear to all, high-ranking officials and ordinary people alike. We see obvious insults against and moral abuse of children. By whom? Let the Russian officers talk about this. But God forbid we should tell our grandchildren. We lived at a time when the school of academician Shchetinin still existed in Tekos, and 300 children studied there, dreaming of a beautiful Russia. We should tell our grandchildren, who will live on Russian homesteads, and here is the school you now attend with pleasure, and which began under us. We protected it. All that will come later. For now, Mikhail Petrovich, teachers of Tekos, teacher innovators. It is hard for you, of course, but you know full well that we cannot reach the truth on our hands and knees. And the children of the school from Tekos, forgive me, Southern Russians, if I do not do everything I should be able to. But I will, and many other people will. How is it there now? Warm, probably. If it's warm, that's good. May the sun shine on you more often and warm the dream each of you has. In hopes of receiving practical advice, I told Anastasia's grandfather of the situation that had come about. The old man stood there, leaning on his staff, which he had inherited from his father, and listened closely to my story. At the story's end, and after my request for advice about how to act in the situation that had come about, the old man was silent for a while. His face was concentrated. Then he raised his head skyward and squinted as if scanning the dimension, and began to speak.
It was unclear to anyone, me, my father, or the high priest, how my granddaughter Anastasia would reveal the mystery of mysteries and answer the question of why the earth had begun to rot. Man had allowed himself to produce sufferings, both corporeal and spiritual.
If the earliest civilizations were considered the most intelligent on earth, why didn't they preserve a happy way of life for their children?
Right now, everything can be returned to God's primordial world. It was unclear to anyone how to preserve it and keep from repeating the same old mistakes. Here, she alone created with her thought the inconceivable combination and immediately put it into practice. Answers will be given to all our questions. Anastasia is compressing events that have been developing for millennia into a single century. She is repeating them. Right now, each person is personally testing the history of the earth and your country. Each will evaluate, draw his conclusion, and write his conclusion down in his family book. Man will be able to know the events of millennia through himself, his feelings, and his soul.
Just as they are now slandering Anastasia, they slandered your ancestors in ancient Russia when they destroyed their culture. They called paganism and the Vedism of ancient Russia terrible barbarism and a colorless culture, How can people be allowed to feel and understand what in fact was there?
My granddaughter has shown through herself the aspirations of her Russian forefathers and is now taking the blows from the descendants of those who slandered them to the modern day, to our children and grandchildren. It is as if this were a performance, a historical play, and she were offering all people living on earth today to choose a role for themselves and then to play their chosen role and watch the situation objectively. Even those who simply observe all that goes on will be playing the part of spectators, living through and assessing the drama, and they themselves will strive to act. I've hurried. You wanted to hear an answer as to who was creating these insults and obstacles. I will answer. An answer is not hard for a priest. People are trying to present obstacles to everyone who has understood and been inspired by the ideas voiced by my granddaughter Anastasia. But those are not simple people. They are bio-robots, guided by a tiny sect that was born long ago, and not in Russia.
I have newspaper clippings, though, and there are the signatures of the people who wrote the articles, and one says specifically that the missionary office of the Tula diocese has come out against Anastasia. There are reports from people in various regions talking about the bad attitude of certain Christian parishes. Do they also have bio-robots, as you put it, that are subordinate to some sect?
Bio-robots themselves do not know about their own subordination. They were simply pre-programmed long ago. However, this programming did not predict the appearance of Anastasia, and so has malfunctioned badly. It has set itself on a course of destruction.
I can't wrap my mind around this. Where can I find confirmation?
If you can't wrap your mind around it, then you can calmly use your logic, and each person capable of thought can search for proof in their own logic.
Use logic?
Yes, simple facts well known to everyone. Just look at how you can reason, basing yourself only on facts.
How?
First, define precisely for yourself what Anastasia has suggested that everyone do.
Well, she suggested that everyone take at least a hectare of land and set up a homestead on it for their family and future generations. As she says, if each family makes their own heavenly corner for themselves, then the whole earth will turn into a paradise. She also talked about how to plant edible plants to fight disease, and about a healthy way of life, about child-rearing, and about a protective attitude toward nature. She has said that God's thoughts are dissolved in nature. Basically, she has constructed a model by which Russia could become a flourishing country where happy families would live.
Talking about homesteads, Anastasia in fact revealed to people the greatest mystery of divine being. She showed the path of man's return to paradise. You can understand this if you combine her statements scattered through the different books into one. She revealed a secret that was kept for millennia by the dark forces. They destroyed everything that could help people find out about it. In the 2nd century of your era, as it's called, the last book written in runic writing was destroyed. This book talked about the divine way of life for man. It spoke of the possibility of mastering the universe through the harmonious mastering first of a plot of one's own land, then of the entire planet called Earth. Once man had perfectly mastered the Earth, the opportunity opened up for mastering other planets of the universe. This method for mastering other planets is psychotelepathic, not technocratic.
But has none of the great sages really ever once spoken about the earth the way she has?
You will not find the discovery Anastasia has made for people in a single one of the treatises we now have, Vladimir. Moreover, for 6,000 years, people have been intensively led away from understanding the earth. They have been offered up other teachings and assured of their truth. Man studies one teaching and quickly sees that there is no truth in it, and they offer up another right away. He studies the other and a third. So life passes, but man has not understood the essence of life, even as he is dying. Meanwhile, intuitively, man keeps being drawn to the land and its great knowledge. Realizing that they could not pull this longing of human souls out by the roots, the forces of darkness decided to compromise it. Basically, there have been many subterfuges through the ages, but in the last 6,000 years, no one has consciously concerned themselves with the earth.
Consciously, is this the way Anastasia speaks?
Yes, the way she speaks and the way people understand her. Anastasia has turned the entire human community onto a beautiful path. Now, no one will be able to impede her. Many people carry her dream in their hearts.
But they are blocking it by slandering Anastasia and her readers, after all. If they understood, they wouldn't be able to stop her. They wouldn't slander her.
Right now, Vladimir, through the efforts of those committing the slander, even higher priests tried to prevent the beginning of a new era directly from Russia. A little later, in another country, they will present the idea in a distorted form, and through this sham, try to defame it. Anastasia was able to predict all this in advance, and her move, which she had thought out in advance, struck the high priest. Anastasia realized that after she revealed the essence of man and earth, far from everyone would be able to restrain themselves from direct interaction with the earth. Haste could be harmful. After all, first it is essential to create one's dimension in one's thoughts. In Russia, the slanderers are now setting up obstacles for people, but people haven't betrayed their dream and have not retreated from creating their own dimension with their thoughts. Of course, the system is powerful, but you can't accuse all people indiscriminately. The clergy have offered varied opinions of Anastasia.
I know that. Several times I've met priests who do understand and support Anastasia.
You and your readers must understand who today is hurt by the new information arising in Russia.
I don't think that many countries, which consider themselves developed, would like to suddenly see another more developed country all of a sudden.
That's logical, but many people live in each country. Do you think they all follow closely and analyze events in Russia?
Not everyone, naturally, but there are certain interested people.
What kind, for example?
What kind? Well, for example, those corporations which sell medicines and supply them to Russia in large quantities. It would hurt them if Russians stopped being ill.
Also,
a great deal of food is supplied to us from abroad, and when Anastasia's plan comes to pass, Russia, on the contrary, will be supplying food to many countries, and it will outstrip the competition.
so you mean Anastasia's plan will not hurt the general populace of the different countries, but rather a particular category of individuals, and they could be in any country including Russia itself, right?
Yes, that's basically right.
Now, tell me, this category of individuals possessing large amounts of capital, can it have its own services following world development trends?
Of course, all major companies have services like that. Otherwise, they would go broke. Some educational institutions even train people like that.
Fine. This means major companies have services that study the development of their business in different countries, and they can influence the creation of favorable conditions for themselves.
Yes.
You agree? Fine. So the further logical chain leads you to the fact that the governments of entire countries might possess similar services. There are many historical examples of that. The most significant of all concerns the tiny Jewish group through whom they today control America, Europe, and Russia, although it is merely an instrument in the priest's hands.
What connection is there between the Christian dioceses coming out against Anastasia's ideas and this group?
As I have said, these kinds of people are bio-robots. They are shaped under the influence of the priest program and spread by a tiny Jewish group.
Where can we find proofs for these assertions?
In the facts of history. Take a close and unbiased look at them.
End of chapter. Join us for the next segment of The Energy of Life, Book 7 of the Ringing Cedars series, History of Religions.